We're a learning organization, and we want to be open to thinking about how we need to adapt in order to look at the character of the sorts of conflicts we're going to face into the future. I'm privileged in Strategic Command that we hold both our conceptual development, our thinking, defence's brain over how it thinks about future warfare. We also have an organization which leads defence's experimentation of how do we experiment to see how we might fight differently in the future. And we do that in combination and conjunction with the armed services in order to help them be able to develop their own thinking. But crucially, of course, how we can then fight in that way into the future in a more integrated way.
But if you were going to simplify and explain, what is Strategic Command? What is your ultimate definition?
So Strategic Command holds many of the joint capabilities of defence. So things which are done not on a single service basis of being part of an Army, Navy, Air Force, but where there are things which are by design that we want to do them jointly. But more than that, Strategic Command is about integrating defence. What we want to do is to drive integration for defence. So this is about making defence more than the sum of its parts. We have a brilliant Navy, we have a brilliant Army, we have a brilliant Air Force. That's fantastic. When we fight collectively, we don't fight individually. And as a consequence, what we need to integrate that force. And my responsibility in Strategic Command is to help deliver on that defence purpose of defending the nation and helping it prosper. And we do that by both owning capabilities which are providing outputs for all of defence. An example would be defence intelligence, which is providing a service to all of defence. But we do that also through trying to integrate capabilities across defence. We do that both inside Strategic Command, but crucially we do that with everybody across defence. So we are an organisation which partners with every other part of defence, and our job is to help everybody else be as brilliant as they can be, and making sure that defence crucially is more than the sum of its parts and is able to deliver on its mission.
And I would imagine as well, a lot of your work involves not wearing a uniform in the same way that you've come into the office today and you're not wearing your uniform.
So we're in our innovation space, co-located with Imperial College in London, and everybody that you'll see here today isn't wearing uniform. I also think for us in Strategic Command, we have a range of different capabilities, some of which would be uniform forces which wear their uniforms all of the time, and many of which don't. I also think there's something about how we think and how we define ourselves. And I define myself more by the output and the contribution that we as Strategic Command make and the part that I play in that, rather than define myself by wearing a particular uniform. Of course, I'm incredibly proud of being an Army officer, and I'll wear my uniform when necessary. But the very fact that Strategic Command is made up of an amazing array of professionals from the Army, Navy, Air Force, the Civil Service, and a whole range of contracting support, sometimes it feels to me that standing up in my Army uniform may well at times be the right thing to do, but at other times it might not be seen as the most helpful thing to do in a much broader organisation.
You sit across so many different elements of defence, including Special Forces. How do Special Forces sit within Strategic Command, and how do they work within it?
So, I mean, I'm not going to talk about the nature of what Special Forces do, but I think if I can give you a single example. So we ask incredible things of our Special Forces, and they are an incredible group of individuals. They are always pushing new boundaries, and as a consequence, their ingenuity, their imagination, and their initiative, we're able to see new ways of working, new ways of doing things, developing new concepts of operation, but also how we might use capabilities differently or how we might generate new capabilities. So Special Forces, to me, in Strategic Command, also act as a vanguard for defence. They are, by their very nature, an integrated organisation because it's more than just a particular unit. Actually, it's a group which is able to generate impact and effect. So they're a microcosm of defense in one sense. They're also a vanguard, which enables us to do new and different things. And then we can what my responsibility is to make sure we can pull those things forward into the wider force. And I think there are things that we're doing in UK defence now in the wider force, which perhaps only a few years ago would have been the preserve of a special force. So in some ways, they incubate kind of new ideas and new capabilities. And by doing that in a really operationally focused, active group of individuals who are determined to be the very best they can be, it really benefits wider defence. And it helps me because it's kind of integration in action. And then I can try and help bring that into the wider defence organisation. Certainly an area I think where wider defence has benefited has been the way in which our special forces have been able to use those uncrewed systems, the lessons of how they use them and the types of capability they use. And we're now seeing a lot of that being pulled forward into the wider force. And we've seen that over a number of years. And that's just one example, I think, of many.
For obvious reasons, as you said at the beginning of your answer, we can't talk about the nature of how they're operating in specifics. But what is your message to Special Forces? Because they quietly get on doing everything. They don't get any limelight. We can't know the detail for obvious reasons. But what is your message to the personnel that you work with in that domain?
So I pass my messages to Special Forces directly and discreetly, which is entirely in keeping with them as an organisation. So I'm probably not looking to use this particular platform as a way to talk to those people. And in many ways, it's not about my message to them, other than when I speak to them to thank them for the incredible things that they do. It's actually about listening to them in order to understand how I can help them deliver on their mission, but also listening to them in order that I can understand how we can bring those benefits into the wider force.
Is there enough money in the pot to be able to help them in the way that they need?
I think our ability to change is not one which is solely predicated on money. Of course, having the right sort of budget is important, but this is also about how we think about how we fight, how we operate, how we change, how we're able to kind of use our initiative, our imagination. And we're here today in our innovation centre, and that's a crucial element of changing how we do defence. And change isn't solely driven by saying let's have more money. The defence budget is over £50 billion, which by anybody's imagination is an awful lot of money. What we need to do is to make sure that we're spending every single penny of that in the most effective way that we can in order to generate the greatest set of capabilities that we can in order to be able to defend the nation and help it prosper.
I wonder, how painful is it when you know everything that you know and you can't tell most people the full picture, even your own personnel, but also the wider public? How painful is that?
So it's not really painful at all. It's something I've lived with probably for quite a long period of my career. So in many ways, it's an entirely natural way of being. But also, I think we've made some significant changes. So in the context of the run-up to the Ukraine war and Russia's illegal invasion, we started to put out intelligence information into the public domain. And so a week before the invasion, we put a tweet out showing Putin's invasion plan. Now that felt a brave thing to do at the time as the Chief of Defence Intelligence, but I felt a necessary thing, particularly where you're against an adversary that you know is going to lie. And once that lie is out in the public domain, it has its own life, and it's very difficult to kind of get back under control. So rather than to debunk their lies, I was trying to pre-bunk their lies and get the truth out first, in order to so that they would then, when they lied, it would be shown to be the kind of the hollow lie that it was. So I think intelligence is changing in terms of how we use it. I'm kind of getting to the point, I think, of becoming more comfortable with it. However, doing interviews like this still feel slightly slightly odd to a professional intelligence officer who spent the first 30 plus years of my career making sure that I was never in the building when a journalist might be near. So I'm having to learn a few things as well.
As we approach the 2-year anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, what can you tell us about your memories of the moment that you knew everything was unfolding and going to Downing Street and briefing Boris Johnson?
I think we knew quite a long way in advance of what we thought was going to happen. Of course, there was always a possibility that that President Putin could have chosen a different path, but we were fairly sure from quite a distance out over what we thought would happen. I think I got home at about 1 o'clock in the morning. I'd been home for about an hour. I got a phone call to say that all the indications were that the attack was about to start, at which point I got back on my bicycle, cycled back into the Ministry of Defence, and we went from there. No matter how much you expect something and no matter how much it's predicted, when something happens, it's still a moment that sort of stops you in your tracks. A war in Europe being such a sort of almost unconscionable, but the response of our political leadership was remarkable. I was incredibly impressed, both in the run-up to the conflict, the decisions that were taken about supporting Ukraine, providing capability such as the NLAWs, our anti-tank weapons that were provided. Those sorts of decisions, I think, were brave decisions that were taken in advance. And I would say the bravery of those decisions was continued into the decision making that occurred immediately post the conflict and has endured up until the statement that we heard from the Prime Minister about the United Kingdom's continued commitment to Ukraine for the next year.
Given all of the training that our soldiers have given to the Ukrainians, and sort of as we move forward and the conflict continues, what is your prediction for what will happen next?
So I think that the training's so important, and enormous plaudits to. And it's been led by the British Army, but it's had a large number of international partners involved in that training. In terms of the future, I think two things. First is that the Ukrainians continue to need our assistance, and the UK's statement, I think, is both really welcome but also very, very important. We need to make sure that commitment is turns into effective capability for the Ukrainians, and we need to work closely with them in order to make sure that it's as effective as it possibly can be, and that our support matches their amazing commitment as a nation. But I also think we probably need some strategic patience. The temptation is to think that we'll give the Ukrainians some capability and that this war will be over soon. We've seen the commitment by Russia to continue the fight, despite everything that's happened to them, despite the unbelievable casualties that they have suffered. We see a continued ramping up of Russian commitment to this illegal operation. I think what that means is that let's make sure we support the Ukrainians as much as we can, but let's also recognize that we're going to have to support them for the long term. It may take longer in order for the Ukrainians to win, and it will also take an incredible amount to make sure that we help the Ukrainians recover subsequently. So this is a complex conflict. It's not going to be a single thing which is going to make it win. It won't be a particular individual capability. It won't be a particular individual operation. This is something where I think we should recognize that we need to, we're in this for the long term with the Ukrainians, and we're committed to supporting them and helping them win.
You think it will take years?
I certainly think we should be prepared for this conflict to last a considerable time.
I want to talk to you about artificial intelligence. What work is being done since the centre was set up, and what are your thoughts on the advantages and disadvantages of the emergence of artificial intelligence and how it's used in the defence world?
We've created the Defence Artificial Intelligence Centre. Of course, that's not the only place in defence where artificial intelligence is being either examined or indeed employed. But we wanted to create a focus to make sure that we're able to leverage artificial intelligence in the early work of this, and I saw this in my previous role as the Chief of Defence Intelligence. We've used artificial intelligence quite a lot in terms of how we deal with data. In our surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities, we gather enormous volumes of data, which is far too great for human beings to be able to process on their own. And quite a lot of that, the value of that information was, I suppose people would say, was kind of lost on the cutting room floor. You use that information for your particular purpose, and then you kind of disregarded it, when in fact there's still value that could come from that information. And we've been using artificial intelligence to help that sort of discrimination. So I'll perhaps try and bring that to life by an example. Photographic interpreters in kind of old language, or imagery analysts, people that are looking at satellite imagery. In the past, an individual would start a shift and they'd have a stack of images. In the old days, it would be a physical stack of images, now a set of images on a screen, and they would have to look through all of those images in order to determine what had changed. Well, the application of advanced technology, including artificial intelligence, and in this case probably more machine learning, but what we're able to do was to make sure that the image which showed the change was immediately served to the analyst, rather than having to go through and do the act of discrimination. So what that's doing is it's helping us in terms of pace, it's helping us in terms of accuracy, it's also helping us in terms of getting kind of moving our analytical capability sort of up the value chain. It also means that our analysts, I think, are able to get a great deal more satisfaction from what they do.
Do you feel then that there are more advantages as opposed to disadvantages in terms of the use of AI?
Defence is an organisation which is always got the potential we could be in conflict with others. Others will undoubtedly be seeking to use artificial intelligence in ways to affect our capabilities. I think for us, we need to both be able to be willing to exploit opportunities and advantages which come through artificial intelligence. We're going to see this, this isn't limited to the military sphere. We're going to see this in every element of our lives. So we'll see artificial intelligence playing a role. There are lots of areas, I think, at the moment where people perhaps don't realize that artificial intelligence is playing such a fundamental part in their lives. Now, we need to guard against the risks. Those risks are both the risks which are posed by adversaries using capabilities enhanced by artificial intelligence or other advanced technologies. That's a common theme. We'll have done that for forever as new technology arrives. I think we also need to make sure that we understand crucially how artificial intelligence is working. We make decisions which could involve people being killed, and if you're making those decisions, you need surety that you're making those decisions accurately and properly. And therefore, it's important when we bring artificial intelligence into those decision-making chains that we understand how the artificial intelligence is working and what the artificial intelligence is doing in that sense. And so for us, there's an important element of the sort of the moral and ethical use of artificial intelligence is fundamentally important to how we do this. We're a moral organization. We talk about defense power. We talk about a conceptual component, the physical component, and a moral component. Part of that is about our people, but part of that is also about the fact that we operate in a moral and ethical way. And so we need to make sure as we bring these new technologies into our work, particularly when it's affecting our decision-making process, that we have got surety over what the technology is doing and how it's influencing those decisions, because we want to make sure that we're acting in an appropriate and proportionate manner.
Given the ripple effects that we are already seeing and the multiple melting pots of conflicts across the globe, how likely is it that we could be on the cusp of World War III?
So I think it's sort of slightly cartoonish to perhaps talk in those terms. Of course, the world is a dangerous place, and as we've seen over recent years, we've got a war in Europe for the first time in many generations. Going back now to over sort of 80 years or so, we face a range of different challenges, but at the same time of that danger, I think we see a resolve amongst like-minded nations in order to try and both push back against those sorts of aggression, but also a determination to sustain the sort of global order. So the world is undoubtedly dangerous, and we face a range of different threats. But I think it's the leadership and commitment of like-minded nations which actually gives me hope that those risks won't come to bear. But when they do, then we need to be committed to confront them. And the Prime Minister's announcement of £2.5 billion worth of assistance to Ukraine for the next financial year, is an indication of the UK's enduring commitment to make sure that we push back against those sorts of threats and challenges.
What is the likelihood, given that Iran backs the Houthis, of us risking getting into a direct conflict with Iran?
There's always a risk of escalation, but I think, as we've seen in Iranian behaviour since the 7th of October and the action by Hamas committing a atrocity into Israel, Iran appears to me to be carefully calibrating its actions and its activities, and one would hope that they would continue to do so and recognise the resolve of the United Kingdom and the United States as a consequence of the action in self-defence that we conducted.
How robust is the MOD and all of its systems in terms of stopping aggressive cyber attacks?
The Ministry of Defence and its systems, we've got a large, complex network which operates globally and is an enormous scale of defence's sort of digital enterprise. And our enterprise is under attack consistently and constantly. We put a lot of effort into making sure that our operations are secure, and we recognise that we need to provide a secure environment where we're relying on digital capability to be able to support our warfighting edge. Therefore, it's as important to have our digital security as it is to make sure that we've got the munitions for tanks to fire or aircraft to deliver. It's a fundamental element. So we put an awful lot of effort into making sure we're as secure as we can be. Part of cybersecurity, though, is to making sure that you're not just trying to build higher walls to keep people out, but it's also about how you deal with problems when they're realized upon you, and how you recover and respond to those things. So there's something really important in that space. What I would say, though, is that our defensive cyber operators who work in Strategic Command, and there are others working inside the Army, Navy and Air Force, but those defensive cyber operators are engaged with our adversaries on a more consistent basis than any other part of defence. And they play a vital role in making sure that we're secure.
How many more cyber attacks are happening? Are the numbers going up? We're hearing figures of millions. What can you tell us about the latest stats on and the trajectory of how many attacks there are?
I think one of the problems with kind of giving kind of absolute numbers is you can categorize cyber attacks into a whole range of different levels. Are they particularly serious? Are they not? I think it is true that we are seeing an increased level of incident on our networks. That continues to increase and has increased over recent years. What perhaps the areas where we are most concerned is when we are receiving sort of sophisticated attacks. I don't really want to go into sort of details of those, but we focus ourselves on making sure that we're able to secure our data to the best extent we can. Of course, we categorize our data into different levels. There is some data which we hold at top secret or secret, which we provide additional layers of security to. We hold other information at an official level, and therefore we should expect, and I think any organization should expect, that anything which is public facing and connected to the internet has a higher level of vulnerability as a consequence of opening and access. Whereas what we try to do to make sure on our systems where we're relying on them for our warfighting capability is making sure they're disconnected from that, from the kind of wider internet, and running them as isolated systems in order to make sure that they're as protected and safe and secure to execute operations.
Given everything that you've just said on the importance of it, though, there's been bad news this week when it was revealed that there were 11 red-rated systems exposed to critical levels of risk, and the MOD was top of the list. So things don't sound like they're going particularly well.
What I would say is that the Ministry of Defence, we operate more digital systems than any other part of government at a scale far greater. And having those sorts of vulnerabilities is where they do exist. I don't particularly want to comment on that number, but where they do exist, it's a focus of our effort to make sure that we're remediating those issues, and it's an area of critical focus for us.
One of your biggest headaches at the moment is recruitment and retention. What's the solution?
I think those problems are slightly different in different bits of the force. Now, I'm not responsible for the direct recruiting of the Army, Navy, Air Force. I'm the recipient of personnel from those forces which come and work inside Strategic Command. One area where I'm particularly interested in making changes is in our digital cohort. So trying to get people to come and work in our digital or cyber environment. I'm not sure that trying to bring people in at the bottom and employ them for 20 years in the military is going to be a sufficiently attractive offer when compared to what may be possible out in the commercial world. So I think what we're looking to do is to make some interventions in order to attract people in. We've just launched a digital bursary scheme, which we're starting in Lancashire with 100 places, but I'd like to scale that very, very significantly in the few short years ahead. The idea being to sponsor young people at school, bring them into the force at 18. I think we need to treat them differently when they're in, pay them based on their skills rather than on joining on pay scales that are sort of you go through with incremental progression. I think we need to probably treat them rather differently. I'd like to value them for the impact and the abilities. Of course, we would fit them within an Army, Navy, Air Force structure, but I think we have to be really flexible. I'd like to give those people an in-service degree through a kind of an apprenticeship scheme. And I'd expect the majority of them to be leaving the force in their kind of mid-20s to go to a second career. I'd hope they join the reserve. I'm sure that those people will also be an enormous benefit to the nation, that they'll be coming out with qualification, experience, and the right sort of life skills and approach where they'd be really attractive to go into the sort of digital cyber workforce in the UK. I'd hope that some of them will then come back later in their career when they've been out and done some amazing things and perhaps come back and offer service later. So I think it's about flexibility. It's about recognizing that that we can't just expect young people to adapt to us. We're going to have to recognize that we've got some adaptation to do in order to make sure that we're the right place for them to come and work. And in some of these capability areas, we may have to have some different approaches. So that approach where we're all of one cohort and everyone is the same, I'm not sure that's going to survive as we go forward.
Taking a step back, what is the biggest threat, do you think, to global security right now?
So I think sometimes it's, in answer to these questions, it's a challenge. It's a bit like sort of rank your favorite list of X or Y, and trying to say this is a bigger challenge than that, I think is at times a slightly invidious piece. I think the in trying to answer the question, I think to me it's around recognizing that so many of these threats that we face, or the challenges that are posed by particular nations, they are global in their implication and often global in their reach. So sometimes we zoom in on what's happening in a particular region or a particular conflict. And of course, that's important that we do that, because we need to understand those in detail and we need to take action where appropriate. But at the same time, you also then need to kind of zoom out and look at the broader context. And many of these threats and challenges we face are not in themselves isolated. Often they kind of come together. So the fact that North Korea, who recent rhetoric would pose challenge around North Korea's ambitions over the acquisition and potential employment of nuclear weapons and their missile program. At the same time, North Korea is providing a significant amount of material to Russia to enable them to continue their fight in Ukraine. So there's a sort of almost a kind of intersection and overlap between many of these threats. So describing this is the greatest threat, that's the greatest threat, I think is perhaps a little invidious. We need to be able to operate at different focal lengths. We need to be able to zoom in on problems, but we also need then to kind of come out and look at the wider context.
I want to talk to you about the protection of sensitive information. Given stories where we've seen breaches of the Official Secrets Act or concerns about former personnel going and working for Chinese companies, is it time to update the Official Secrets Act?
Well, I think there's inevitability that things are different. I mean, the Official Secrets Act, I think, was 1911. I think was when it was first written, and the world inevitably is a fundamentally different place, and where I think previously we were thinking of security being largely a physical set of activities of stopping people from taking things and sharing them inappropriately. Of course, there are a range of different vulnerabilities now which come. So whatever we do, we need to make sure that we're focused on the sorts of risks and threats that we face. And I think regardless of the Official Secrets Act, of course, in defense, a fundamental, one of the principles of war is security. So making sure that we are secure in our operations in every sense that means is a really important part of what we do. Of course, we run an amazingly large and diverse enterprise spread across all of the United Kingdom and with operations globally. So it's a not insignificant challenge to make sure that everything remains secure, but it's a really important part of what we do. The act itself and the ability to prosecute under that is perhaps the kind of the responsibility of others, but the importance of security, of not just security, but also running appropriate counterintelligence operations is fundamentally important to military capability, and we should see it not as a sort of a backstop thing. This is a crucial element about military capability and military operations. If you're not secure, then you are vulnerable, and if you're vulnerable, you may not win. And we need to make sure that when we conduct our military operations, and particularly when we warfight, that we've got the capabilities that will win those conflicts.
How confident are you that you can combat the increasingly aggressive hacking that you are seeing?
So, I mean, it's as with all threats and challenges we face, the parallels that many of these things feel that they're an arms race where there'll be new capabilities developed, new techniques, new vulnerabilities that people are trying to exploit, and we need to make sure that we're at the sort of top of our game to do that. I go back to the answer that we discussed earlier around making sure we've got the right quality of people coming to do our digital and cyber work, because we need the very best people to be coming and doing that for us, and making sure that we can have the very best talent, because it is that in many of these areas, whether it be with hackers or whether it be with adversary nation states, we need to make sure that we've got people at the top of the game in order to make sure that we can combat those threats.
And just finally, I'd just like to talk a little bit about your career. As you said previously, you have been serving for a very long time. You joined in 1986, but when you describe your current role and how you got to it, you use a particular phrase. What is that?
So I've referred to myself as the accidental general, and I suppose that comes partly from background, partly from my kind of how I viewed my career. Growing up, I certainly never thought I thought I would join the army. I never thought I would be a senior officer, let alone I didn't even know what a general was. My father was an NCO in the Navy, and then he was a taxi driver. My mother worked in a factory building TV sets. I didn't know what generals were or what they did. When I joined the army, I joined a kind of slightly odd, small part of the army in the intelligence corps, which which is the army has halved in size over the course of my military career. The intelligence corps has quadrupled in size. The most senior officer in the intelligence corps in 1986 was a brigadier. It was always, in those days, it was always a man, because there were only male officers at that point. I'm really glad to say that's changed, and we've now got a major general in the intelligence corps, and she is a remarkable officer. But from that period, that would be the ultimate expectation, that you could make that one person of each generation would go on to be a brigadier, if they could endure that long. So I never had any thought that I would end up being a general. And in many ways, I don't think of myself as being a general. My function is not to command anything. I'm not the same. I don't have the same role as the heads of the Navy, Army, and Air Force. They've got their roles, and the current heads of those three organizations are all brilliant individuals, and they do their jobs brilliantly. My role is to support people. So I really don't command strategic command. My job is to support, enable, empower, and help people be what they can be. So of all of the bits of strategic command that I've got, whether it be the permanent joint headquarters, overseeing defence's global operations, special forces doing their remarkable things, defense intelligence, the national cyber force, our overseas bases, defense digital capability, the defense medical services, or our logistics and support capability, they do all their things for defense. They don't do them for me. They do them for defense. They do them to support the Army, Navy, Air Force, and for wider defense output. My job is to help them be successful. And I really like it. I really enjoy it. But my job is not to kind of to be very grand about anything. My job is to sort of get down and help. And it's something that that in some ways the nature of my career has really helped me into the sort of position that I'm in. But I never really expected to be here. But while I am here, I want to do the maximum good that I can, and crucially to kind of make it work for the organization, but also to kind of enjoy it and have a bit of fun while I'm doing it.
Thanks for watching. For more from Forces News, like and subscribe to our channel.